No one anticipated this. Jimmy Evans made a statement a few moments ago that stunned the Daystar community. It was more than a casual remark. The revelation rocked the basis of everything we believed to be true about Joni Lamb. Fans are frantically trying to get answers. Social media is in a complete collapse, and the consequences are only getting worse. Why now, and what did Jimmy disclose? The veracity of his statements could alter your entire perspective on this tale. Jimmy Evans remained silent for years. He was regarded by others as a dependable voice, a soothing presence, and someone who would always be there for the Lamb family. He was the one who stepped in when things got tough, the marriage counselor, and the guest preacher. However, behind that. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. And hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Now, back to the topic. What we were talking about was a serene picture of a man clinging to a secret. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to forget that moment. Then, suddenly, everything was different. After a chat leaked online, Jimmy's silence was abruptly broken. He didn't say anything loud or harsh, but it was enough to rock the Daystar world to its foundations. During that private discussion, Jimmy discussed a meeting that had lingered in his memory for years. It wasn't only a friendly gathering. He described the experience as being heavy, inappropriate, and totally out of place. He claimed that there was tense, controlled tension in the room where he sat, opposite Jonathan Lamb and Susie. Then he was asked to do something he had never been asked to do. Their goal was to persuade Jonathan to submit to Joni, his mother. Not only honor her but also completely obey her, treating her as though she were the voice of God in his life. Jimmy paused. He went along with it even though it didn't feel right at the time. In an effort to maintain harmony and prevent more dissension, he reiterated that Joni was speaking on behalf of God. But the words weighed heavily on him. He became aware of how incorrect they felt as he said them. He never lost sight of the situation. Years later, he said that he felt regret about it. Joni is the voice of God was a statement that touched on more than simply family dynamics. It was about maintaining a system that did more harm than good, about control, and about spiritual pressure. The floodgates were triggered when the clip leaked. Those who had put their trust in Jimmy were unsure about how to react. Supporters of Daystar, seasoned viewers, some of whom were even in the ministry, began to doubt everything. Was this the type of leadership taking place in the background? Would Marcus Lamb have approved of this? Above all, how long had everyone been acting as like nothing was wrong? Jimmy's moment of candor struck a deep chord. He claimed that he believed he was being loyal, doing the right thing, and safeguarding the ministry. However, he now understood that allegiance did not mean quiet. Complicity was involved. And the truth had to be revealed, no matter how unpleasant it was. Having the guts to tell the truth and refuse to participate in a cover-up. And that has brought us to this point, where we are totally free, unaffiliated with any significant organization or authority, enabling us to speak out against injustice, stand up for the truth, and, speak for others who have experienced abuse, hardship, or who have been a part of a culture that pushes people to hide things. Well, we're thrilled that we can be a force that can illuminate the darkness and provide room for the Lord to cleanse the body of Christ. We would want to express our gratitude to everyone who has written to us, supported us, and shown us love. It has simply been too much to handle. The goal of the family meeting was to make things better. That was the beginning. For years, Jonathan Lamb had been suppressing his emotions while observing the disintegration of his surroundings. His family, his confidence in Daystar's management, and the flawless image that the world continued to hold. There was tension, quiet, and unhealed wounds behind the lights and cameras. Therefore, there was no drama or desire for vengeance when he held a private family meeting. It was about bringing some truth into the room at last. He didn't make it formal or reserve a boardroom. It had nothing to do with ministry business. It was a personal matter. Everyone was invited. Jimmy Evans, brothers, spouses, and others who had known Marcus and Joni well. And Joni appeared, much to his amazement. For a brief instant, there was actual hope. Perhaps she was prepared to listen at last. The walls might fall down. However, that optimism was short-lived. Jonathan made an effort to be courteous as the meeting got underway. He remarked about how swiftly Joni moved on, how things felt strange in the ministry, and the sadness that had accumulated since Marcus's death. He urged everyone to be honest and open with one another, not to criticize but to understand one another. People started sharing. Some were emotional, some were calm. It was uncooked. It was authentic. They discussed how they felt excluded, unheard, perplexed by the changes, and wounded by the quiet. When it was Joni's turn, she took out her phone and set a timer rather than listening or opening up. "You each have 60 seconds, she stated directly. They initially believed she was kidding. She wasn't. Each person has 1 minute to describe years of suffering, perplexity, and treachery. People exchanged astonished glances. All they have is that 60 seconds. When the final person had finished, Joni got up, surveyed the room, and declared that everyone was acting in terror. After that, she left. No follow-up, no prayers, no hugs. She was flying to see Doug Weiss in New York. She was gone in an instant. The remaining individuals sat in startled silence in the room. In that instant, Jonathan knew that the mother he had hoped to reach was no longer there. She had no intention of fixing anything. Anyone who disagreed with her was just sent out because she had already made up her mind. Your concern is to follow her instructions. Says. You can't be here if you can't. No. No. I'm worried about it. No. No. You argue over everything, Jonathan. You must stop. I'm not debating. You are disputing everything. You must stop. And you both have to accept her authority at the end. Regarding Daystar Network, she is God's voice to you here on the property. She is the voice of God. Either you give in or you go. That is the reality. The next time you guys are on, there will be a viewer comment regarding Doug, right? You may either read it and submit it, or you can walk away. Additionally, there isn't going to fall somewhere in the middle. Jimmy Evans, who had arrived with the hope that this would be a healing period, sat still. Later on, he said that he didn't think the meeting was spiritual at all. The energy was off. It was a tense, regulated, and even manipulative atmosphere. Jimmy complied in the moment when someone in the room ordered him to tell Jonathan to submit to his mother. Joni was the voice of God in Jonathan's life, he told him, and over the ministry. He knew deep down that what he had said was wrong, and he regretted it. He was troubled by the sentence. That moment was a line in the sand for Susie and Jonathan. They weren't just angry when they left the conference, they were transformed. Something broke. They were aware that things would not return to normal. They were unable to act. No longer. They couldn't keep quiet to preserve their reputation. It had nothing to do with revolt. They had to preserve their daughter, their beliefs, and their own integrity in order to survive. It grew colder in the days that followed. Joni did not make contact. The people who used to stand next to them were quiet. Within the ministry, friends started out softly withdrawing. Behind the scenes, other people checked in with Jonathan and Susie, stating that they witnessed the incident but were unsure of how to assist. Others, such as Denise Boggs, a dependable friend and counselor, wrote sincere letters urging Joni to take her time, listen, and seek God before continuing her relationship with Doug Weiss. However, Joni Lamb remained silent. Rather, she made her circle tighter. She intensified her choices, especially her accelerated relationship with Doug. And even her own kid was considered disloyal if he questioned it. This attitude of submit or leave was now dictating how the ministry and the family operated. The family gathering that was supposed to mend old wounds instead made them worse. Daystar no longer featured Jonathan and Susie, not because they were resentful, but only because they were unable to participate in something that felt so different from what it had once represented. The ensuing silence was no longer one of deference. Self-defense was the reason. In the background, Daystar was also starting to transform. People took notice. Messages were sent by viewers. Longtime backers inquired about Jonathan's whereabouts. Why? Was Susie no longer hosting? Why did everything feel different? However, nobody received any responses. Only well-executed pieces, well-curated programs, and smiles on air. However, the truth was buried. There was more to the meeting than just family strife. It demonstrated the change in power. How the ministry used to. It seemed to have been founded on control and appearance rather than unity and religion. It had nothing to do with sharing grief. It was about not looking back, regardless of who was harmed, and moving on. Jimmy Evans started to notice it as well. He began to speak in a more humble and honest manner. Even with the best of intentions, he acknowledged that silence had contributed to the concealment of the situation. That instant, it haunted Jonathan, where he commanded him to submit. He now understood that he was only keeping the mask on a little while longer, even if he had thought he was helping. Denise and others made another attempt to connect. She cautioned that pride, not God, was using Daystar. That the consequences would be more severe than anyone anticipated if nothing changed. However, it was already taking place at that point. Employees started to go. Viewers began to see through the holes, funders withdrew, and pastors turned down invitations. The pivotal moment might have been the family gathering. It might have been the start of recovery. However, it ended up being the decisive blow. An intensely tense and arrogant moment that caused something to break irreparably. Joni went outside and the possibility of full restoration with her. It was devastating, but also illuminating, for Jonathan and Susie. Now they knew what they were up against. This was more than grief. Control, silence, and a refusal to confront harsh realities were all part of this. Furthermore, they would no longer cooperate. One meeting behind. The illusion was broken by locked doors without stage lights or cameras. The ministry founded on trust, the united front, the ideal Christian family. In that room, everything broke. And everything was different after that. A family may experience times when everything seems to fall apart. Moments that alter your perspective on the individuals you have loved throughout your life. That moment for Jonathan Lamb happened in private, away from cameras and without an audience. A gut instinct was the first step. There was a problem. Still young and naive, his daughter started acting strangely. He initially believed it might be fear or tension. However, the more he listened, the more he understood that this was no trivial matter. There were just a few things she said that made him shudder. Jonathan refused to accept it. No parent ever does. However, the parts of the puzzle quickly began to fit together. And it was terrible what they indicated. She had been harmed by a trusted family member. In the worst conceivable way, physically, not verbally, not emotionally. No parent should ever have to learn of this transgression, and no child should ever have to endure it. He didn't hold off. He didn't dismiss it. It didn't go away, he told himself. Jonathan took it on directly. As any father would, he took action. He probed. He insisted on answers. Additionally, he anticipated that his parents, Marcus and Joni, would shield their granddaughter and help him discover the truth. However, it was not the case. Rather than uniting around him, they withdrew. Daystar's chief, Marcus, claimed that they had already investigated it. That the family member had been exonerated following an internal probe. Only a few behind-the-scenes chats, no professionals or cops. Marcus informed him that it was finished. The case is over. For Jonathan, however, it was only the beginning. He was not at peace. He was ill. And Joni let him down even more when he turned to her in the hopes that she may realize what was truly going on. She didn't think he was real. She was unwilling to listen to it. She supported Marcus and stood up for the defendant. She didn't even inquire about specifics. She turned it off. More than anything, that stung. Jonathan was no longer merely a son. He was a parent attempting to keep his own child safe. Additionally, the woman who had reared him and who had spoken for love and safety on national television had abandoned her. She didn't pay attention. She offered no consolation. She brushed him off. Something inside Jonathan cracked at that very moment. He gave up attempting to explain. He ceased to seek assistance. He retreated spiritually and emotionally. He realized then and there that he could not trust those who had made their lives on trust. Ignoring the abuse was only one aspect of the treachery. It was about choosing image over truth, silence over protection. Years went by. They didn't discuss it again. Not at home, not in public. The secrets remained hidden. Similar to a lot of other people in the ministry. Nothing ever got better despite Jonathan and Susie's best efforts to keep going, stay near the family, and keep their heads down. No one ever addressed what had happened, so every family meal, every newscast, and every sermon on faith and healing only served to increase the quiet. Then Marcus passed away, and rather than slowing down, they accelerated. Joni did not share the family's grief. She didn't pause to think. She was organizing a fresh wedding to Doug Weiss, a man who almost anyone knew, in a matter of weeks. A man appeared out of nowhere and quickly established itself as a mainstay in Joni's life. That was the last clue for Susie and Jonathan. It was really erasing the past. It was not going to be painful. Joni wasn't simply leaving them. In real time, she was rewriting the story as though the wound had never happened, but it did, and it was profound. When the family gathering was summoned, Jonathan fervently hoped that perhaps we still had the opportunity to discuss everything. Perhaps this time Joni would pay attention. Perhaps, just perhaps, the truth will be revealed and the healing process will start. It didn't work out that way, though. He was instead instructed to surrender once more, to obey Joni, to view her as the voice of God, even though that voice had failed him and his daughter, and to revere her. Jonathan realized then that they would never be able to resolve this. Not that they were making an effort. No one ever accepted the reality of what had happened to his daughter. There was only quiet, no second inquiry, no apology, and no justice. And it was intolerable for Susie to watch it all unfold as a mother and a wife. At that point, she started to voice her opinions, first in private and later in public. Not to raise a commotion, but because she was no longer able to bear the burden alone. Other members of the ministry began to discover out. Hearing the information shocked those like Denise Boggs, who had spent years with the family. Denise had believed in the ministry, preached with Marcus, and prayed with Joni. However, she was unable to ignore this. She wrote a private letter to Joni. She pleaded with her to slow down, to pause, to listen to God's voice rather than her own ego. She cautioned her that Doug Weiss wasn't who he seemed and that he was dangerous. A wolf in sheep's clothing, she said. Daystar was no longer a ministry, she said. It served as a tool for image and control. However, Joni did not respond as she had previously. She didn't give a call. She gave no explanation. She made no attempt. She left her children, her grandchild, and the truth behind once more. And it wasn't simply emotional harm that was done. It was spiritual because everything starts to feel hollow when a ministry that preaches truth refuses to confront the truth in its own house. Although they were unaware of the entire plot, the audience began to get the gist. The on-camera smiles were contrived. The sermons seemed flimsy. There was no longer any warmth. And the legacy began to crumble gradually. All because of a betrayal that hasn't been set right and a secret that is too hard to discuss out loud. At one point, Daystar felt invincible. It was more than just a Christian television station. For millions of people, it served as a spiritual home and a household name. People watched for teaching, worship, and prayer. They took what they saw at face value. Standing on stage, the Lamb family spoke about faith, family, and the power of God while grinning and holding hands. It appeared flawless, almost too flawless, to the outside world. But there was more going on behind the lights. And nobody wanted to discuss it. Not initially. Following Marcus. After Lamb died, things started to fall apart more quickly than anyone had anticipated. People initially believed Joni was merely pushing through her grief with fortitude. But to those closest to her, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like denial. She returned to the spotlight in a matter of weeks. She was advertising her new relationship within months. Additionally, before anyone could discover their. Subsequently, she was wedded to Doug Weiss, a man who was almost unknown in the ministry. And then the questioning began. Not only from spectators but also from ministry personnel. The ones who know how decisions were being made. Suddenly, those who had spent decades walking with Joni and Marcus were ignored, pushed away, or excluded from meetings. Additionally, when they requested clarification, they encountered a wall. They were told to trust the process. Everything is under God's control. Behind the scenes, however, the choice was not made by God. Joni was the one. Everything changed quickly. Susie Lamb and Jonathan Lamb distanced themselves from the spotlight. They ceased to provide updates, to appear on programs, and to act as though nothing was wrong. It wasn't okay. In actuality, they were having difficulties long before Marcus passed away. They had kept quiet in the hopes that things would resolve themselves. However, things got worse the longer they waited. And something fell apart when Joni married Doug. It was no longer about grief. It has to do with control. Then the tipping point arrived. The family gathering that was meant to be therapeutic. Rather, it made the truth more visible. Everything altered because of what transpired in that room. Joni didn't show up to hear. She arrived to establish guidelines. She allowed everyone 60 seconds to talk. Take a moment to process years of spiritual suffering, betrayal, misunderstanding, and heartache. When the final voice was done, she got up, brushed their remarks aside, and left. A chilly reminder of how far things had drifted was all that was present. No prayers, no tears, no reconciliation. The ministry began to leak from there. Internally, people kept their pronouncements to themselves. They simply departed. Employees who have worked there for years submitted their resignations. Invitations were turned down by pastors who had previously lauded Daystar. Ministry partners gradually withdrew their assistance. The emails ceased. The donations started to decrease and still Joni smiled on TV acting like nothing was wrong. However, people sensed a serious problem. Daystar's unity, honesty, vulnerability, and energy were all gone. Image management had taken its place. It was all about maintaining control, giving the impression that everything was anointed, blessed, and preferred. But there were tears off camera. Confrontations occurred. Longtime friends had private discussions in which they questioned the fate of the ministry they had formerly supported. The moment that broke the illusion was when the audio was leaked. Pastor and close friend Jimmy Evans had been overheard in a private discussion. He validated what many had feared in that moment. As the voice of God in the ministry, he acknowledged that he had been asked to tell Jonathan Lamb to submit to Joni. Not honor, not respect, not surrender. That discussion went beyond a leadership dispute. It was manipulation of the spirit. It demonstrated the degree of authority Joni was attempting to uphold. Not only as a mourning widow, but in the role of an unquestionable leader. People were in disbelief. The ministry that once stood for healing and truth had changed into something darker, something that rewarded allegiance to a human rather than to God, something that punished dissension. At that point, everything started to fall apart. The audience ceased to watch. Donors withdrew in silence. Comments on social media, previously replete with Gratitude and encouragement had given way to doubts, worries, and heartache. Jonathan is where? Why has Susie left? Why won't Joni discuss the true situation? Since silence in the face of truth always seems like guilt, Daystar's stillness simply made it worse. It was far more agonizing behind the scenes. Friends turned into strangers. The studio turned into a battlefield. And those who had once been all of us. A wall of secrets now separated meals, prayers, and sermons. Joni kept preaching. She grinned. She was the host. She took a trip. Her inner circle, however, had evolved. She had lost the folks who used to tell her the truth. Yes men took its place. She was now accompanied by Doug Weiss, whom she had married after Marcus's passing. He wasn't there to heal, though. He was there to safeguard the new image and the story. And image has always been the focus of this. Daystar had established a reputation for unity, family, and faith. However, as suffering cannot be permanently concealed, that image was now disintegrating. The truth cannot be buried, and don't anticipate it to rise. When it happened, everything changed in appearance. Controversy now centered on the individuals who had previously served as the spokespersons for Christian media. The individuals who had motivated millions were now a warning. They allowed power to take precedence over people, not because they were bad people. They opted for silence rather than openness. Additionally, they mistook spiritual leadership with individual power. The collapse isn't as loud now. It's silent. Though sluggish, it's genuine. Since the brand wasn't actually harmed. For those who trusted them, it was heartfelt. The believers who believed Daystar was unique, the families who admired them, and the viewers who joined them in prayer. And it was, in many respects. It was founded on vision and love. However, it got lost. The world did not attack it and cause it to fall. Because the truth was revealed, it fell. And no amount of worship music, stage lighting, or broadcast production can cover up the fissures when that occurs. Since a ministry begins being more concerned with appearance than what it means, collapse isn't a query.